Government grant. This is under PAS 20 or Philippine Accounting Standards number 20, and it defines government grant as assistance by government in the form of transfer of resources to an entity. So there should be a transfer of resources in return for part or future compliance. So pasabot, conditional ni siya with certain conditions relating to the operating activities of the entity. So most of the time kaning grant or subsidy, of course, dili naman kay maghatag og hatag lang ang government, di ba? Di naman charity entity ang government na bigay lang ng bigay. So most of the time naagyud na siya condition nganong nihatag siya ana nga grant. So we are going to consider kung unsa to siya nga kondisyon, kung kanus-an nato ma-fulfill ang kondisyon, unsaon nato pag-fulfill ang kondisyon. Nganong kailangan man nato to mahibal-an, ma'am? Because it is based on those questions nga mahibal-an pud nato unsaon nato pag-recognize as income ang grant nga ilahang gihatag. So ayon, binigay ko na nga. Yung grant na binibigay sa atin ng government or yung grant na binibigay ng government sa entities would be considered as income on the part of the entity. The question is, how are they going to allocate such income? When are they going to recognize the income? So, ang kato ng mga questions, related siya sa condition. How are you going to comply on the condition? When are you going to comply on the condition? So, they work hand in hand. Kung wala kang gagawin sa condition, hindi ka magko-comply, wala ka ding income na i-recognize. Alright? So, government grant, including non-monetary grant, hindi naman sa lahat ng panahon perang ibibigay ni government. May mga times na properties like land, building, etc. This will be recorded at fair value, and it shall be recognized when there will be a reasonable assurance that the entity will comply with the conditions and the grant will receive. So, it's a two-way condition. So, or it's a two-way criteria. Magko-comply si entity and magbibigay ng grant si government. Okay? So, the government grant shall not be recognized on a cash basis as this is not consistent with GAAP. Okay. Grant related to asset and grant related to income. So, as we go through the problems, we will have an idea kung unsay pasabot aning related to asset and related to income. Okay. So, government grant shall be recognized as income on a systematic basis over the periods in which the entity recognizes expense, the related cost for which the grant is intended to compensate. So, in other words, the grant is taken to income over one or more periods in which the related cost is incurred. So, we have some illustrations here. And we're going to answer as well some problems. So, yung mga illustrations na yan, andyan yan siya, simulat sa pool pa lang. So, hindi ko na siya i-discuss. Instead, let us have these few problems to aid us in our understanding sa government grant. Alright? Okay. So, let's begin with the first problem. So, walang pangalan. An entity with no name. Eto. Okay. We are to prepare journal entries for the first year to record each independent government grant. Ay. Bakit? Sige, andun. Sinend ko na siya sa messenger if you want to see the problem. Ay, okay. Kalag ba? Ayan. So, I'll give you some time. Siguro a minute to read the problem and then let's proceed in answering it. Okay? Alright, so let's prepare journal entries for the following grants. An entity received a grant of 30 million from the British government. So this has something to do with, ang condition niya dito is dapat meron tayong safety and environmental activities na gagawin within the area. So, the 30 million grant will not be considered as income unless we comply with the condition of the British government. So, furthermore, it states that the costs are expected to be incurred in 4 years. So, we have 2, 4, 6, 8 na in expenses incurred. Alright. So, sorry. Okay, let's have the first entry. What will be our entry? Mr. Alfanta? Hello? Anybody? Ay, andyan pa ba siya? Nakawala na siya. Ayan, wala na nga siya. Sige, ako na lang. Okay, entry number 1 would be as simple as cash and our deferred grant income. How much? We were given 30 million grant by the British government. Ma'am, pwede din maghatag og grant ang dili taga-ato? Pwede siguro. Why not? Okay. Ay, sorry. Ayan, 30 million. And what's next? We incurred an environmental expense during the year. That's 2 million for the first year. Credit cash. So, this is why I said na it's easy. Kasi, it's just a typical recognition of income and expense. And later, since naka-comply na ka sa requirement niya, pero hindi naman lahat, kasi diba 4 years ka nga mag-comply dapat sa condition nga naa kay mga environmental activities. Therefore, dili pa nin nato pwedeng himuon as income ang ato ang deferred grant income for the first year. Kailangan nato siya i-allocate for within the 4 years nga nag-comply ta sa iyahang requirement. So, a portion of this deferred, ano ibig sabihin ng deferred, di ba? Wag muna or hindi muna. Kaya siya tinatawag na deferred. Not yet. Okay? So, or i-delay muna natin. So, the deferred grant income is not an income but a liability. Ibig sabihin, pag hindi po tayo nag-comply, ang liability na to is babayaran natin. Pero pag nag-comply tayo, pag nag-comply ka, pwede ka nang lumabas. Charot. Pag nag-comply tayo, pwede na natin siyang i-consider as grant income. Okay, so since in the first year, nag-comply naman tayo, kaya meron tayong portion na ibibigay. But the question is how much? In the first year, we incurred 2 million. In the second year, we incurred 4 million, 6, 8. Therefore, at the end of 4 years, we will be able to incur a total of 20 million na expenses. But in the first year, we only incurred 2 million. So, hindi siya safe na sasabihin natin, I'm sorry, hindi siya safe na sasabihin natin 20 divided by 4. Instead, we allocate it fairly. Therefore, that's 2 over 20 na allocation for year number 1. So, the part of the deferred grant income na pwede lang nato i-recognize in the first year would only be 2 over 20 of the 30 million, and that is 3 million only. So, kung ato ni siyang ipadayon sa year 2, okay, so although ang sinabi niya lang naman is mag-prepare tayo for the first year. So, kung ato ni siyang ipadayon sa year 2, it would be the same environmental expense, cash, and then deferred grant income, etc. But, ang ato ang expense for year 2 would be 4 million this time. Okay, 4 million. And our grant income would be 4 over 20. So this is 6 over 20 and this is 8 over 20. So for year 2, we have 30 million times 4 over 20. Ayan, hapit na mag-alas 11. So that's 6 million. But this is for year 2. Okay, let's proceed to item number 2. Ano po bang sinabi ng item number 2? An entity received a grant of 40 million for the construction of a facility with an estimated cost of 50 million. So, binigyan niya tayo ng grant, pero ang iyahang kondisyones is dapat daw magtukod ta og facility or research facility. At ginawa nga naman natin. Sayang din naman yung grant, di ba? Na 40 million. So nagtukod tag building or research facility which has a cost of 50 million. And since this is a depreciable asset, ang atua pong income is or deferred income, it's as if ato po siyang i-depreciate together with the condition na building. So, if you could see the relation, ang item number 1, gihatagan tag grant kay para for safety and environmental activities. So, atong i-allocate ang grant based sa expense nato sa kaninga condition or sa environmental expense. In the second item, gihatagan tag grant para in connection sa research facility. So, the grant will be recognized as income as the building is recognized or as the building is in the operation or in use of the condition attached to the grant. So, boiling it down, we are going to depreciate the grant as if or together with the depreciation of the building. So, hindi naman siya depreciate yung term, but we are going to record the income. Sige, unahon na to ang building. So, we have depreciation expense, and accumulated depreciation. And sabi niya, we have, pila daw to ka years? 20 years. So, that's 50 divided by 20. We have a depreciation expense of 2.5. And our grant will have the same period of recognition of income. 20 years pod. So, we have 40 million divided by 20. So, we have a 2 million grant income during the year. So, samtang nag-depreciate ta, the next year, mag-depreciate na pod ta, next year, mag-incur or mag-recognize na pod tag income. So, ingana lang siya because the grant is in relation to that depreciable asset. Number 3, an entity is granted a large tract of land. Okay, so you have there a land. This time, a non-depreciable asset. So, hindi mo naman dinidepreciate ang land, right? So, land and then deferred. Ano ba ito? Deferred grant income. At fair value tayo as always. So, that would be 50 million. And the grant requires that the entity shall construct a factory and employ only personnel residing in the region. So, at ginawa nga naman din natin. So, nag-construct tayo building worth 80 million in relation to the grant. And this building is depreciable for 25 years. So, depreciate na po nato ang building 25 years daw. So, that's 80 million divided by 25. Therefore, we have an expense of 3.2. However, the grant cannot be depreciated. The land cannot be depreciated. But, since it is in connection with a depreciable condition or depreciable asset, which is the condition of the grant, still, we are going to allocate it based on how we depreciate such assets. So, 25 years lang gihapon. Therefore, we have 2 million grant income for the current year. So, mura lang siya walay kalahian din hiya sa item number 2. Although cash ni siya and then kani kay land, Mura lang gihapon siya walay kalahian. Nganuman, kay ang iyahang condition is the same in relation to a depreciable building. Alright, so that would be item number 3. Now, for item number 4, which is the last item, we received a grant of 10 million. So, actually, walang condition na nilagay. So, walang condition. Binigyan niya lang tayo ng 10 million dahil sa na-experience natin na losses because of the earthquake. Sana may ganyang grant din tayo dito sa SPAC para mahuman na niya itong building na di halos mahuman-human. Anyway, so we have received cash, and since hindi na daw natin kailangan na magkaroon pa ng kondisyon kasi binigay niya na ito sa atin, therefore, agad-agad, that would be income. 10 million. So if you could notice, kanilang siya ang nalahi. Walay deferred nga nahitabo. Walay deferred. Instead, it is considered income immediately. Why? Because there is no condition attached. Ano mo pa padugay-dugayon, wala man day condition. Ide, go, income. Okay, so that's how we account for government grant. Okay, our time is already 11:01. So I think we need to part ways. Charot. Last na lang jud. Kaning item 26 or hindi. Ito. 26-8, but diretso na lang tag-answer. Wala na tayong ano. Di na ako maghatag og time sa inyo ha. Di man gyapon mo answer. Ako naman gyapon mo answer. Alright. So, we have preposterous company. This is going to be our last problem for government grant. We will not dwell too much here kasi hindi naman ganun kahirap. Okay. So, what's new about this is we're going to journalize using these two approaches, the deferred income at saka deduction from asset approach. And what's unique about this problem is that we are going to learn how are we going to journalize a government grant that becomes repayable. So, if it happens, di ba, I mentioned na most of the government grants are attached with a condition. So, nadyo na siya mga condition. Now, what happens if wala ta naka-comply sa atong condition? So, basically, dili dapat nato i-recognize as income ang katungag grant kasi hindi tayo nag-comply. And dahil hindi tayo nag-comply, we have the liability to return the grant to the government. Okay? That's why it says there, the government grant became repayable because of our non-compliance. So, ibabalik natin yung grant sa kanila. So, swerte mo lang kung andyan pa yung grant, pero kung ginastos mo na, malas mo. Alright? So, let's learn how are we going to account that for this kind of situation. So, we have preposterous company. So, number 1, deferred income approach. The most common approach that is used in accounting for government grant is kaning deferred income approach. Kaning atong gigamit in the first problem, this is actually a deferred income approach. So, ingato lang. We received a government grant of 2 million. So, I think this is cash. Tama ba? In relation to a construction of a building. So, we have cash, debit, and credit deferred grant income, and this is in the amount of 2 million. So, kailangan daw nato magtukod og building which was located in the slums of the city. Okay? Actually, wala ta nagtukod, nagpalit na lang ta. Wala na tayong time. So, nagpalit na lang tag building in the amount of 12 million. So, andun pa rin naman yung condition na-achieve pa rin naman natin. So, debit building, credit cash of 2 million. And Ayan. The useful life is 5 years. Wala siyang residual value, so wala tayong problema. Although on January 1, 2020, that's just 1 year, okay, the entire amount of the government grant became repayable kasi hindi tayo nag-comply. Bakit hindi daw tayo nag-comply? O siguro may iba pang mga requirements doon aside from the purchase of the building. May iba pang requirements. And hindi tayo nag-comply. Siguro bumili lang tayo ng building, hindi natin siya ginawang factory. Okay? Kasi sabi niya, factory building. So, basta, boiling it down, hindi daw tayo nag-comply. Therefore, we are going to become liable in repaying the grant. So, pero on January 1, 2019, okay pa naman ang lahat. So, let's have depreciation expense related to the building and accumulated depreciation. Ilang years? That's 5 years, right? So, that's 12 million divided by 5. We have 2 for depreciation and we're going to recognize the income as well. Isang taon na rin naman ang dumaan. So, meron na tayong income. So, in relation to the building na 5 years, kaya 5 years din yung deferred recognition of the grant. 400. Kaso nga lang, let's just put it 1,119. Kaso nga lang on 1,120, it becomes repayable. Therefore, ibabalik natin sa kanya yung na-receive natin from the government. Ayan. So, deferred. Alisin si deferred grant income. This time, pila na lang may balance ni deferred grant income? 2 million minus 400 nga gi-debit. So, we only have 1/6 left. And we are going to pay the grant in full. Okay? Mao na siya ang disadvantage. Kasi pag hindi ka nag-comply, babayaran mo ng buo ang binigay sa'yo. So, babayaran natin ng 2 million si government. So, the difference of 400,000 is actually considered as loss on repayment of government grant. Ayan. Magiging loss na siya. So, actually, kaning 400 is actually the grant income nga ato ang gi-recognize in the previous year, 2019. So, happy na unta ta kay nanatay income. Pero later on, dili di ito siya tinuod nga income kay wala dito nag-comply. So, ato ra pud siyang i-offset. Mahimo siyang loss. Previously, nahimo siyang gain, pero later on, nahimo siyang loss. So, if you will look at the whole picture, wala jud tay income nga na-recognize. Wala pud tay loss kay nag-offset lang man silang duha. Tama? So, that is how we're going to account if there is non-compliance of the condition. Now, on 12/31/2020, our entry na lang will be depreciation expense and accumulated depreciation na maulang gihapon 2,4. So, yan na lang. Wala na tayong deferred grant income. Wala rin na tayong grant. Wala na tayong grant. Binigay na natin or binalik na natin kay government. So, that's how we account for repayment using the deferred income approach. Now, what if we're going to use the deduction from asset approach? So, this is something new, but this is still easy. Pasabot lang ani, ang grant nga atong nadawatan, dili na nato iagi-agi og deferred. Ato na siyang idugang or i-deduct rather sa ato ang asset. Okay, so going back, we purchased a building, right? We purchased a building in the amount of 12 million. Later on, we received a grant. Instead daw nga magbutang tag deferred grant income like what we did in the deferred income approach, kaya nga siya tinawag na deferred income kasi meron tayong deferred grant. Diri sa deduction from asset, kaya din siya tinawag na deduction from asset approach kasi instead na deferred income, we credit the asset itself in relation to the grant. That's the building. That is 2 million. So, if you will be asked, how much is the carrying amount of the asset? That would be 10 million. That's 12 minus 2. But of course, kailangan nato ni siya i-disclose sa ato ang financial statement para di po malisang ang ato ang mga investors nganong ni gamay ang building. So, on 12/31/2019, we record depreciation expense and accumulated depreciation. So this time, we are not going to base on 12 million but on the 10 million nga carrying amount. Divided by 5. Bakit 10 million gani? That's 12 minus 2 million. So 10 million divided by 5. That would be our expense. Napabatay laing entries? Wala na. Nganong wala naman? Nganong magbuhat pa man tag-ing ani nga entry kung in the first place wala tay deferred grant income. Tama? So, wala na tay laing entry, kanilang depreciation. If you're going to look at it, it's actually the same. Ngano man? Compare it to the first approach. You have depreciation expense of 2.4. You have an income of 400. Expense, 2.4. Income, 400. Pila ang net? Net expense of 2 million. You are using the second approach. Ang ato lang gi-record, expense, 2 million. So, ginet lang siya, it's actually the same. Wala siyang magiging effect sa income statement, ganun pa rin. Now, on 1/1/2020, since nahimo naman tang liable kasi 'di ba, hindi nga tayo nag-comply. So if that's the case, ana si standards, if you are using the deduction from asset approach, ibalik ang kadtong imuhang record in the first place. 'Di ba this is what we journalized in relation to the grant? Ato lang daw ni siyang balihon, i-reverse. So instead nga cash building, ang reverse niya building cash in the same amount, 2 million. Ahaman ni padulong ang credit cash nga 2 million, pangbayad sa grant. So basically, equal lang gihapon siya sa kaganina. Credit cash nga 2 million. Credit cash, 2 million. So mo lang natong entry on the day of repayment. Now, on year-end, this is something crucial pag abot kang deduction from asset. Kasi ang atuang depreciation expense is no longer 2 million. Our depreciation expense will now change nga naman. Sa una, 2 million lang ang atuang original depreciation. We only have 2 million. Pero since nadungagan man nato ang asset atong building na 2 million kay ato man gibalik didto atong gideduct sa una, okay? Di ba gideduct nato siya sa una? Pero karon ato na siyang gibalik kay wala ta nag-comply. Therefore, our depreciation madungagan pod. So, additional depreciation would be 2 million divided by 10. Tama ba? Ay, divided by 5. 5 years lang man to, di ba? Times 2. That's for 2019 and 2020. Ay. Nganong 2019, 2020 man? Divided by 5 times 2. Kasi, we are now down to December 31, 2020. So, we are going to recognize an additional depreciation of 2019 and 2020, that's 2 years, in relation to the 2 million nga ato ang gi-deduct as a grant. So, our total depreciation now would be 2.8 million. Or, you could use the other analysis. You have your 2020 depreciation, that is 12 million. Nganong 12 million man? Mao ni ang original cost sa imong building. As if walay grant. So that's 12 million. That would be 2.4 plus your 2019 depreciation that should have been incurred. Nganong should have been? Wala na to siya na-incur kay ato man siya gideduct. Nganong gideduct? Kasi nga deduction from asset ato ang approach. Kanang 2 million din ha, we divide it by 5, that's why we arrived at the 400,000. So, it's still 2.8 million. Simply put, depreciation as if walay grant nga nahitabo. So kung walay grant nga nahitabo, 2 million unta ato ang original nga cost. I mean 12. 12 million divided by 5, so that's 2.4. Plus, ang katong grant last year, nga atong gideduct, dapat ato tong i-add ug balik. Kasi nga, depreciation as if walay grant nga nahitabo. So, plus 400,000. So, that's 2.8. Now, when we go to 12/31/2021, pila naman ang ito ang depreciation expense? Depreciation expense will be balik ta sa ato ang original nga pila na lang ba ang ato ang carrying amount? We have 12 minus the 2 minus the another 2, but later atong gi-add ang building, and then minus 2.8. So we have carrying amount of 7.2 million. So that 7.2, pila na lang ka years ang nabilin? 3 years. Therefore, we have 2.4 nga depreciation expense. Asa actually gikaning 2.4, pwede ra nato gamiton ang ingani nga analysis. That would be 12 million divided by 5. 2.4 million. So, the next following years or the next 3 years, 2.4 ang ato ang depreciation expense, straight line. Alright? So, that's what happens if we are not able to comply with the condition of the government. So, that is government grant. No? So, di na kasi nga nakahirap. Alright? So, question?